Welcome back to Living in Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to thank all of you who've been joining us since 2005. Yeah, it's been a while. It's been an honor to share with you information, news, analysis about what's going on in Mexico, both in English and in Spanish. Um, as you know, those of you who have been following us throughout the years, one of the topics or one of the issues that we address almost in every story or every show has to do with violence and security and organized crime. And we are about, I don't know, it's going to be 7 days, almost less than a week away from elections in Mexico. And that has been the one of the issues that is most discussed, not only in Mexico, but also abroad. There's been different groups, different media groups that have been publishing stories about violence in Mexico. And one of those one of those media groups is the Washington Post that came out with an extraordinary story about how organized crime has literally or tried to control of all industries, the tortilla industry in Mexico. And I promise you, after listening to our following guest and reading the story, you're going to look at tortillas in a very different way. Joining us today is Mary Beth Sheridan. She is the chief correspondent of the Washington Post here in Mexico City. Mary Beth, welcome to the show. Congratulations. I hate to say congratulations. It's an extraordinary story, but it is terrifying. Could you just put into context for our audience how does the tortilla industry survive amidst organized crime? Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ana Maria. Yeah, what we found that was so interesting is that, of course, we know there's a lot of organized crime in Mexico, and also in the US, people are aware of the idea of drug cartels. It's kind of the Netflix image. I think for those of us living here, we understand that it's not quite like that. But I think the extent to which organized crime has penetrated so many areas of the economy is kind of what's new. I mean, we're not looking anymore at kind of a bunch of bad guys. We're looking at an economy that is now penetrated by organized crime. So it gets even to the tortilla. We were told that thousands of tortilla shops around Mexico now have to pay extortion. And as you are aware, the extortion problem is now extending to so many areas, whether it's gasoline, it's chicken shops, it's mining, it's farming, and so on, that it's becoming a structural part of the Mexican economy.
You know, that's what was so fascinating about this story is that you think of a tortilla shop, how much money and those of you who are watching us and listening to living in Mexico, I mean, you probably walk by a tortilla shop at least once every so often, depending on what neighborhood you live in. It is an important part of Mexico's economy. And it's an important part of the neighborhoods where people live and work. So what was so extraordinary is that you wouldn't imagine, I mean, how much money can you get from these tortilla shops?
Right. So I think the thing that's so interesting is that if at one point the organized crime economy was really built around big organizations, cartels that moved cocaine or marijuana or whatever to the United States, what we've seen is this transformation. The big groups, in many cases, have split apart, or there's small groups that kind of are satellites. I mean, we're now talking about well over 500 different crime groups that have been identified in Mexico. And so a lot of them aren't able to rise to the scale of a sort of Sinaloa cartel or Chapo Guzman or whatever it is. And what they've really done is they've turned inward on Mexican communities, and they are just extorting and taking over as much of the activity in the local economy as they can. And tortilla shops, of course, are just one of the many types of businesses that they extort. But, tortilla shops work almost always in cash. And of
Mhm.
course, they are such a staple food. I mean, Mexicans on average eat about 165 pounds of tortillas each per year. So, there's just a constant flow of, tortillas out and cash in. So they have become easy targets for crime groups that want to have their own steady source of income.
What's also very interesting about your story is that although it's focused on the tortilla shops, not even the industry, on the tortilla shops, you actually highlight how these groups, organized crime, has been able to infiltrate and um, extort money at different stages of the economy that eventually results in a tortilla. So it's not just the tortilla shops, the owners of the tortilla shops that are selling these tortillas. It goes way back. It goes to the corn that the tortilla shops need in order to make tortillas.
Right. And that's the thing that we're seeing, this kind of vertical integration. So in the case of tortillas, a lot of the white corn that is really favored to make tortillas comes from Sinaloa. And what we found there is that organized crime groups have penetrated the water supply. So what they're doing is they're forcing farmers that are not allied with them effectively to pay more. And the people who are allied with them, the farmers who have deals of some sort with them, get their water for free. So there you see the first tax on the honest corn farmers. And then what happens, the corn is put in big trucks. They head further south, and there's just an insane amount of highway robbery that happens. So there again, you see entire truckloads of corn stolen. In some cases, truck drivers pay a fee, so they're not robbed. In other cases, there's the trucks have to get insurance, but again, that adds to the costs for the tortilla shops that have to pay for that extra insurance, right? And then you get all the way to the tortilleria, there's extortion. In some parts of the country, what we found is that crime groups are actually moving in and taking control of the supply of corn, and they go to the tortilla shops and say, you must buy from me. And in some cases, the same with the gas that's used at the tortilla shops to make the machines run.
Joining us today is Mary Beth Sheridan. She is the bureau chief of the Washington Post here in Mexico City. Now, the story also tries to describe the depth of the depth and the impact organized crime is just having in industries in general. I mean, and there's a lot of examples, and we know organized crime. We know that during this administration, the what they call in Spanish cobro de piso and extortions have dramatically gone up. And I mean, the thinking is that because it seems that organized crime has better territorial control, or they've increased their territorial control around the country, it just makes it much easier for these organizations to be involved and in the formal economy. So just give us more examples of what you found as you were doing this, as you were writing up this story.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are familiar with a couple of the more well-known examples of industries that are affected by extortion, like avocados, for example. But we found once you start looking, you find it all over the place. So, for example, even the government acknowledges in its official statistics that 70% of the wood, the lumber that is harvested in Mexico, is illicit, a lot of it in the hands of crime groups. 1 in every 5 cigarettes comes from the black market. We found that 30% of fuel is either stolen or contraband. That's a massive market. Think about all the cars and trucks in Mexico, how much fuel they consume. So we really saw this as a very widespread problem, again, that I think is more now a structural problem of it's a really big piece of the Mexican economy rather than simply some bad guys of the sort made famous in Netflix.
Yeah. No, it does really. I mean, after reading the story, and it has the graphics are extraordinary too. But after reading the story, you just realize that almost every, not every activity, but there is the potential of any economic activity in Mexico may have some influence of organized crime. So, for example, those of us who live in Mexico City, you go to these local markets, the tianguis, which are these informal markets that are on the corners once a week or twice a week in different parts of the neighborhoods in Mexico City. And you know that there is extortion and there is pressure on these small, I mean, they're selling candy or they're selling used clothes. I mean, it's just hard to assimilate the fact that most of the informal economy, I think, may or may not be influenced by these criminal organizations, which I keep on wondering. I don't know what your opinion is. How much does this affect the price of goods?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We found some data that was put together by a professor at UNAM who monitors inflation, particularly in agriculture. And what he found was last year, inflation with agricultural products, tomatoes, corn, onions, you name it, it was around 6%. And of that, about almost 1.5% was of that 6%, a quarter roughly of that was extortion. So think about all the agriculture in Mexico. Uh, you're talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars, and really so many sectors of agriculture, as well as clearly other industries. But the agriculture one is, uh, and agriculture, small commerce. It's very evident.
As you mentioned that data, I recall that a year and a half ago when President Andrés Manuel López Obrador presented his anti-inflation strategy, do you recall one of the things that was requested by the food producers was security? I mean, they were literally asking, you got to stop people from hijacking our cars or our trucks, and you have to stop extortions. And when I heard that, I was like, does that really impact inflation? And I guess, but just listening to your data, there is something to say about the impact beyond the normal cost and the costs that have been evaluated in terms of how much security increases or the insecurity in Mexico increases the cost of goods or to produce certain goods. But now it's interesting listening and reading your story that it does have an overall impact on the economy, on people's pockets.
Yeah, it's built into the price. I mean, a lot of the estimates of what insecurity costs in Mexico, I mean, a certain amount of that looks at what big companies have to pay to hire security
Right.
guards or have, much more elaborate, gates and so on. But you're actually talking not only about here what companies have to pay extra, but literally a piece of the profits of so many small companies are going to criminals.
And that's my point. I mean, did you get a sense like in the normal price of a tortilla, how much more do they have to charge because of all these costs of paying off these criminal groups so that they won't burn? I mean, one of the videos you have in this report is these guys burning up a tortilla shop with it's a video from security cameras. So I mean, I was quite. I mean, do you have any sense how much more expensive a tortilla may be?
Oh, it's really hard to say. Um, the price of a tortilla varies around the country. Also, one interesting impact we were not able to get into that much in the story just for space reasons is that there are places where tortillas are being sold very cheap. And there's a lot of suspicion in the industry, the tortilla industry, that actually there's also a money laundering problem, that there are individuals that open tortillas and sell them cheap precisely to launder money. So it's a difficult number to track, but for sure the producers of tortillas are very worried about often being put out of business because they're having to pay extra money for security, for extortion, whatever it is, and the customers just won't pay it. They'll go elsewhere or perhaps even eat fewer tortillas.
Wow. Now, one last question, Mary Beth. Mary Beth Sheridan. She is the bureau chief of the Washington Post here in Mexico City. One last question. Did any of the people that you interviewed have any suggestions, ideas? How do you change this?
Boy, that's a difficult one. I think
Yeah.
that in general, the tortilla shop owners were very concerned that they just feel like the justice system is not functioning, not listening to them, not following up on their complaints. And of course, one of their concerns is that there are some people who go and denounce cases of extortion and uh, then face retaliation. And their conclusion is that there's corruption in the judicial system, and somebody in the Fiscalia sent the word back that they denounced. So I would say, of course, these are very complex problems, but how
Mhm.
to make Fiscalias less corrupt, more efficient. I think the law doesn't really consider extortion a serious crime and requires a pretty high
Mhm.
level of evidence in order to pursue the crime. So I know in the campaigns right now, I believe both candidates are talking about changing the way extortion
Right.
and cobro de piso is treated in the law. So those were some of the things that were mentioned to me. And then, of course, there's questions of more security on the highways, also on trains, which are robbed and carry corn. Those were some of the concerns people raised to me.
Mary Beth Sheridan, Washington Post Bureau Chief here in Mexico City. Thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations on your story.
Thank you so much, Ana Maria.
Thank you. And we're going to be posting the story on my X account at AM Salazar, also on this show's account, which is at Mexico Daily. And of course, on our YouTube Live channel, we'll be also posting a link. So I really hope you have a chance to read the stories. It is extraordinary work. We're going to go to commercial break. I'm Ana Maria Salazar, and you're listening and watching Living in Mexico. Don't go away. I'll be right back.